There is a moment, late at night, when the city shutters its noise, and a single light reveals the outline of a man and his choices. In that moment, the question is not what he will do tomorrow, but who he will be when every excuse is removed. Imagine a voice quieter than panic and older than ambition, telling him to set down what he carries and test himself by the weight of empty hands. This is the first law the samurai practiced without ceremony: to know what to keep and what to discard, and to live by the clarity that follows. Miyamoto Musashi, the lone swordsman who walked his own path, wrote that you must cultivate the spirit to accept reality and cut away what is useless. His life was not about the clash of steel alone. It was a study in silence, in habit, in the precise shaping of a person through repeated small acts. We begin here because every rule that follows is a refinement of this original refusal to be carried by the currents of convenience. Chapter 1. The Awakening. Hiro Tanaka was 35 when the awakening began, not with a dramatic collapse, but with a slow erosion. Sleep that never healed, meetings that multiplied like ivy, a body that no longer remembered its own steadiness. He had climbed by the maps others drew and found at the top an unfamiliar loneliness, an inbox that defined his hours and a calendar that owned his mornings. The day he closed his office door for the last time, he did not shout victory. He simply sat with the quiet and felt the absence of obligation, like a blank paper stretched before him. In that silence, he read Musashi's words on discipline and saw how small refusals could become a life. He decided to test a rule: one small, non-negotiable action each day, an hour of practice, an hour without screens, a walk before light, and to build identity from these commitments rather than from titles. This was not about productivity in the modern sense. It was about insisting upon a shape to his days that matched who he wished to become. Chapter 2. Rule 1. Presence as Practice. Presence is not a pleasant state reserved for retreats. Presence is a weapon against distraction and a scaffold for choice. The samurai perfected presence through kata and breath, reducing complexity into intention until movement and silence were indistinguishable. For Hiro, presence began at dawn with a single breath and a slow cup of tea, taken without reaching for a device, without planning the day. He learned to hold attention like a blade, unswayed, observing where the mind wanted to flee, and returning it gently to the task at hand. Presence allows one to notice the small betrayals, an unexamined habit, an apology given by reflex, a promise broken to oneself, that over time become the architecture of a diminished life. To practice presence is to build a habit of fidelity to the moment, and through repeated fidelity, the shape of character hardens. The rule is simple. Every day, choose 1 hour in which nothing is demanded except to be fully there. Chapter 3. Rule 2. Embrace silence to hear truth. Silence is not absence, but a medium in which truth becomes audible. The ancients sat in silence to hear the rhythm of their impulses and to disarm the loud urgencies that masquerade as necessity. Musashi spent long periods alone, not as punishment, but as calibration, learning which desires were necessary and which were noise. Hiro discovered that the crackle of his devices had been a substitute for inner guidance. When he allowed silence, his decision sharpened and his fears lost their persuasive urgency. Silence also revealed pain that had been covered by action, and the work of facing that pain became the crucible of authentic change. The practice was not asceticism for its own sake, but a disciplined tool. 2 silent hours twice a week, gradually increasing, used to observe the mind, to sit with unvarnished feeling, and to return to the world more deliberate. In this silence, he found a quieter strength that did not demand being seen but acted precisely when needed. Chapter 4. Rule 3. Choose one true task. The samurai trained with one sword until its movement was the extension of intent. Modern life offers 1,000 small swords and asks us to be flung between them. Musashi advised mastering the essential rather than scattering skill across many things that are never mastered. Hiro applied this by choosing one work of consequence to cultivate. Not a career pivot to chase novelty, but a single craft. Writing with clarity about what he had learned from the path. He made it non-negotiable, a discipline carved into morning hours, and allowed other tasks to be secondary or delegated. The power of this restriction is twofold. It produces depth, and it simplifies decision-making, which is where wasted willpower often disappears. Over months, as practice accumulated, the work grew in rigor and meaning. The man who performed small, constant tasks became someone who could be trusted by himself. This rule is not isolation, but focused contribution, a single, true task, practiced daily until its truth is evident. Chapter 5. Rule 4. Train body and mind as one. Samurai knew that a mind untrained to the body's rhythms is vulnerable. Technique without stamina collapses, and courage without endurance shrivels. Physical training is not vanity. It is a discipline that builds resilience and honest feedback. Hiro began walking before light, lifting heavy things with steady repetition, and practicing balance and breathing as if rehearsal for emergencies, both physical and moral. He discovered that small physical contracts, do 10 push-ups on waking, walk 30 minutes, maintain posture at the desk, became anchors during storms of stress. The unity of body and mind reduces the surprises life inflicts. When the body remembers steadiness, the mind can be clear. Training, in this sense, is a metaphor made literal, habituating strength, endurance, and controlled breath, so that in crisis the man is not newly anxious, but simply enacted by habit. Chapter 6. Rule 5. Steward your time like a castle. Time is the most literal of resources. Once given, it cannot be called back. The samurai treated time as the domain to be defended, building rituals to protect it from erosion. Hiro reorganized his days into small keeps: morning practice, midday boundary around communication, evening reconstruction of thought. He stopped answering every demand and began responding with a measure of deliberation, treating requests like questions to be answered rather than commands to obey. This stewardship required saying no with firmness and without spectacle, reducing commitments until each remaining one served an intention larger than the fleeting need to be agreeable. The consequence was not busyness, but a patient structure in which meaningful work could continue uninterrupted. Time, when defended, becomes the house in which discipline lives. Chapter 7. Rule 6. Meet mortality with equanimity. One of the harshest but most clarifying lessons in Bushido is to keep death in view, not as morbid fascination, but as an organizing principle that sharpens priorities and dissolves petty fear. Miyamoto Musashi carried the awareness of death into his training, so that his choices were bold, not reckless, and purposeful, not timid. Hiro learned to write his eulogy as a practice, not to dwell on endings, but to ask what shape of life he would regret leaving unfinished. This exercise altered daily behavior. Minor anxieties surrendered their authority, trivial resentments softened, and courage to pursue honest work increased. Facing mortality creates a fierce simplicity. Illusions of endless time fall away, and what remains is the integrity of each act. Accepting death does not require drama, only the quiet acceptance that time is limited, and actions should be chosen with that fact in mind. Chapter 8. Rule 7. Mastery of self above external victory. The samurai's highest adversary was not an opponent, but the self that seeks comfort and applause. Musashi's path suggests that true victory is internal. Mastery over impulses, over vanity, over moods that move a man from his center. Hiro's final trials were internal, periods when old habits tempted him back, when recognition beckoned as a mirror for worth, when impatience returned in quiet forms. He applied small, repeatable disciplines, returning to practice after failure, keeping silence when provoked, choosing sobriety of response. Mastery meant acknowledging when he failed and returning to habits without self-condemnation, treating discipline as a method rather than a verdict. Over years, the man's inner life steadied. External success became an echo, not the measure of his direction. The most consequential victories are those fought within and won through steady refusal to be led by comfort. Chapter 9. The Transformation. The slow accumulation of the 7 rules did not create a different world for Hiro. It created a different eye through which the world was seen. Tasks became clear, noise dimmed, and the small acts of fidelity shaped a life that matched an interior shape he had long failed to notice. He no longer defined himself by title or reaction, but by the rhythms he kept. Waking early, practicing presence, protecting time, training the body, embracing silence, keeping death in view, and pursuing mastery of self. Friends remarked on a calm that was not distance but depth. His days had fewer storms, not because the world was gentler, but because he had learned to be actor and steward rather than responder. The transformation was quiet. It did not advertise itself with trophies. It was a creasing of character into a sturdier form, like a blade tempered in a slow fire. Chapter 10. Practical Rules to Begin Today. The path of the samurai is practical and repeatable. Choose one non-negotiable act each morning. Keep 2 silent hours each week. Designate 1 true task for deep work. Move the body daily. Protect 3 hours of unbroken time. Remind yourself of mortality weekly, and return to practice after every lapse. These practices are not mystical. They are constraints that produce freedom by narrowing unnecessary options. The discipline required is not heroic but mundane, rising before light, refusing the immediate convenience of distraction, sitting with discomfort long enough for it to clarify. Over time, these small constraints accumulate into an architecture of life that resists the erosion of external pressures. Begin with refusal. Refuse to answer a device at certain hours. Refuse a meeting that lacks intention. Refuse to let the day be decided by the loudest voice. Conclusion: the quiet victory. The samurai taught that a man becomes what he trains to be, and that training is less about grand gestures than about what is done without witness. Hiro's life, like Musashi's, did not become easier. It became clearer. The 7 rules are not commandments shouted from a distance. They are quiet agreements with yourself, practiced daily until they form a single, unambiguous posture in the world. If you wish to live by an older discipline in a new age, begin by choosing small, non-negotiable acts and by refusing the habitual comforts that fragment attention. Let presence, silence, focus, unity of body and mind, stewardship of time, mortality's clarity, and mastery of self be the scaffold upon which your days are built. In that structure there is no spectacle, only the steady work of becoming the kind of man who stands with composure when everything else is gone.